We'd like to welcome you today on behalf of GED Testing Service. I'm Bonnie Goonan, and my partner with me today is Susan Pittman. Both of us are longtime adult educators, and again, we have gone through many of the things that we're going through yet in the 2014 series of the GED testing. What we're going to be talking about today is we're going to talk about the most recent data that has come through on the GED mathematical reasoning test. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about those most missed items and connecting them to what they actually look like. Then we're also going to talk about some resources and ideas. Please know that in our next webinar, we will focus more on the strategies for teaching mathematical reasoning skills. But we want to make sure that all of us are on the same page. So let's take a quick look at a national update on this mathematical reasoning test. And when we look at that passing rate, just like in the past, mathematical reasoning is the lowest passing rate, with a rate of about 58%. But I really like the look of the average passing score. The 157 really doesn't look that bad. And when we look at the average non-passing score of a 143, we know that that's within 1 to 4 questions of our students either passing or not passing. But Susan, what do you think of that chart there? Does that help us out at all?
Well, I think the chart makes a big difference to us because as we look at that graph, we can see just how many people out there are so close to passing. You know, it's not everyone who's in that other percentage there, but 44% of the students who are not passing this test, they are in that 140 to 149 range. And as you said, Bonnie, that could be anywhere from 1 to 4 different questions, depending on where they fall within that range. So what we hope to be able to do today is to actually go through and talk about why students are having difficulty, where we see the problems, and what we want for every one of you who are out there joining us today is to think as you're going through, okay, if these are the areas that are really creating concerns, what are some things I can make and what are some adjustments that I can make as I go through? And we're going to talk about some of these. Some Bonnie and I like to call quick fixes. They're things that we can do tomorrow in the classroom and actually begin to see some real benefits. Some of them will take a little bit longer as we go through because of that need to build those foundational skills. But let's talk just a minute about what mathematical reasoning really requires from students. You know, it is a reasoning test. It's not a mathematical computation test. So when we have to reason, that means that we're going to have to take and put into practice those quantitative and algebraic skills that our students have. That means that it's more than just having an understanding or maybe this rote memorization of formulas, but rather that someone knows when that formula is appropriate and how it should be used and the steps that are involved in it. There's a big difference between teaching the why of math and the how of math. And since most of us who are out there are in a situation where math was not our major, it is something that many of us enjoy working with math and we use it on a daily basis. But getting down to that why is the essential ingredient for our students. Because you can teach all the procedures in the world and the shortcuts, but that's not going to help the student when they face a new type of problem. The other thing that is an issue here is the fact that many of our students don't have real strong critical reading skills. And although we don't typically teach reading when we're teaching mathematics, we really need to be because students are going to need to be stronger readers if they're going to be able to answer questions and figure out, is my answer reasonable? Have I used all of the data that's there? I want you to think for a minute about the fact that there are really 4 overarching challenges on this new series of the GED test. And all of these are challenges and things that our students desperately need when they move not just onto the test and to pass it and earn their credential, but as they move forward in real life and looking into the workplace. There's critical thinking and reasoning skills across all of those content areas. People have to solve problems, and problem-solving skills are there on all the areas as well. And as I said, most people don't think about the reading skills required in math, but students who are effective readers become more effective problem solvers. And then there's writing, and yes, we know that there's not a writing sample on the GED mathematics test. We do know that students need to be able to write and move through what process they're using in order to solve problems. So we have to think about how to integrate all of those. We know that our students are capable. They can handle higher standards. They can understand the why if we teach in that way rather than just the how. But we also know that we have to continue to contextualize teaching math because we have to show students not just that it's something that you're going to do to answer a worksheet or take a test, but that you're going to actually take that math out into the real world and use it. And that's sometimes the missing piece for our students is, the question that they all ask of why do I need to know this? Well, it's up to us to be able to help them understand how they'll be able to use things as they move forward. So we're going today, as we go through, we're going to talk about what things are most missed, but we're also going to look at it from a standpoint of, well, what does that really look like and how does that look in real life itself? So we love this quote, what is not started today is never finished tomorrow. And that's one of the things that we have to keep in the forefront of our minds as we're thinking about how do we make adaptations in the classroom. So at this point, we're going to go through and we're going to talk about the most missed items. Now, some of you may say, oh, well, I've seen some of these before. You have. However, what we've done at this point is to actually dig a little bit deeper into the process itself and what students would need to do in order to no longer have these as most missed items. So we're going to start out with just some basics in quantitative reasoning. And, as Bonnie and I talked about all of those, we thought, yeah, students sometimes have problems with formulas, but these are some very basic things. Knowing how to compute the area or the circumference of a circle. Well, yes, that is a very basic one, and it's one that you see on the formula page, and it's one we see in our books. However, we're not always asking students to work backwards. I have the circumference. Now I have to find out what the diameter is. Well, that means that I've got to rethink that formula. I have to reason through what information is missing and how am I going to get there. Most of the time, the materials that we have, they're pretty straightforward. You're going to work with circumference of a circle, or, as we have on this page, you're going to work with area of polygons. Then you have these nice, neat little formulas, and we work with them, and, we have the area, length times width, and that's pretty much it. But how do we back up? How do we help students find a side length when they're just given the area and maybe one other piece of information? How are they going to do that as we're moving through? So as you look at this, we have to look at it from this standpoint. Are we in the classroom giving students the opportunity to take something like the problem that you see on your screen where we have to find the height of a polygon when the area is given and the base is given. So that means I'm trying to find that side. I'm trying to find that missing piece. So I want you to think in terms of your materials in the classroom. Are they providing students with this type of opportunity, or are they really teaching students to just look for computing perimeter, computing area. If they're not, then you need to look at, well, how can I adapt those problems? How can I take something in the book and I can change it around? Maybe what I can do is do the problem of the day, and students are asked to find different parts of something as opposed to just using the formula in its normal method. We want our students to be able to reason through what's missing and what do I do next. And that's such an important one. Now, if you're familiar with the practice test or the free practice test, or you're familiar with the item sampler, then what you're going to see here should look pretty familiar, because students are asked to use formulas, and they're asked to find data from tables and be able to come in and answer a question. This is multiple steps. They have to be able to reason through, and they have to be good readers as well, because they have to be able to go in and look and find the information that's there. If you've not spent some time with those item samplers or the free practice tests, please consider doing so, because it can make a huge difference for you. But Bonnie, there's something else students are having difficulty with, and it has to do with shapes, but they're a little different.
Yes, it is. And when I looked at this one, you and I talked about the fact that this is a problem on the 2002 series test as well. At this point, we're calling them two-dimensional composite shapes, and students need to be able to compute the perimeter or area of two-dimensional composite shapes. On the 2002 test, we called them irregular shapes. However, please don't get too concerned. No, the house is just merely a graphic for students to look at or for us to look at today. What we're really talking about is in the real world, we don't have perfect squares, perfect rectangles with which we work. Instead, we have very irregular or composite types of shapes. And so let's take this to the real world situation. This is not a GED testing service problem. However, it illustrates the way we use this type of skill in our real world. This is just a sample question where we have a woman who's planting a garden with the dimensions shown below. Now, if your students are like mine, they would look at that first little dot or that first little icon and say, I have no clue what shape that is, because I'm not sure my teacher taught me a formula for that strange looking shape. No, what students need to know how to do is to partition shapes, no different than on the previous series of the test. They need to know that in order to find the area or the perimeter of an irregular or two-dimensional composite shape, they have to first divide it or partition it up. And from there, they have to decide what types of formulas they're going to use. You can see already that this is not a one-step problem. It is multiple steps. And students need to persevere to step-by-step go through this type of a problem. And then, of course, once they know either the square footage, such as this problem shows, they have to then do a basic number operations problem where they multiply the square foot cost by the number of square feet. More than one step. So when GED Testing Service found this to be a most missed item, it's not only that they can compute the perimeter and area of two-dimensional shapes, but also that they can persevere through multiple steps in solving a problem. Another area that our students have difficulty with is being able to use scale factors. Can I decide what's going to happen to the magnitude of a size change if I either increase or decrease some part of that shape? And again, it's using scale factors to determine the magnitude of the shape change. And the neat thing is if the figures are similar, you can teach your students to use a formula. Remember, it is similar figures, not similar figures. So students really do need to be able to identify what figures are similar, which ones are not. And that requires that they be able to compare lengths and corresponding sides. So if we're looking at this type of a shape, again, as I said, very easy to integrate the use of a formula for scale factor. So let's look at what that might look like in a real-world situation, regardless whether I'm doing a perimeter change or an area change. In the perimeter change, you can see I just use the formula, substitute the numbers, and ta-da, I have the equivalent number. The same thing works with an area change where I look at the old area, the new area, look at the relationship, and there again, have students use that formula, insert the numbers, and solve. This type of thing would be very easy for all of us to incorporate into our classrooms if we're not doing so already. But the next mathematical reasoning most missed area is one that for Susan and me was difficult to accept because it's such a day-to-day type of problem for us. And that is that our students have difficulty solving things like two-step real-world problems with percent increase and percent decrease. I can think of ways I use this every day, from shopping to workplace situations, determining commissions, gratuities. Our students really do use this type of a problem-solving method all the time. So if we use it all the time, what in the world does it look like on the GED test? Is it really something that's difficult? Are the numbers difficult for us to use? Not really. When I look at this sample question from the item sampler, it talks about Dominic, who earns a set amount of money each week plus an 8% commission rate on his sales. And it tells the student or test taker that if Dominic sells a certain amount worth of merchandise in 1 week, how much will his total earnings for the week be? As Susan and I looked at this problem, the first thing that we thought of is, I'm wondering if our students are doing the multiple steps that it takes. Are they indeed, doing the step of determining the commission rate, and then are they adding that amount to Dominic's earnings? Again, if they're not, that's going to get them the wrong answer. But it's not difficult to create these kinds of questions to give our students multiple examples. And this would be one way we can do it. These are questions that Susan and I just created to show students percent increase or percent decrease. As simple as, again, if a store is paying a certain amount for an item and those stores do a certain percentage of markup, what's the amount of markup? How much will that store earn? Or if I'm a salesperson and I earn a certain percentage of commission off of certain things that I purchase, what in the world am I going to earn? How many sleeping bags may I have to sell and get that commission so that indeed I can purchase something I want? So percentage increase and decrease should be able to be tied to lots of real-world examples. None of our students should be able to say to us, how am I ever going to use that? Now, those are the quantitative reasoning most missed areas. And I'm going to have Susan spend just a moment to open up the guide or the workbook that's been created for this webinar so you can take a look at those areas. And I want you to think to yourself, okay, what could I do in my classroom to more contextualize these most missed areas and to dig just a little bit deeper with my students so that maybe these areas could get my student 1, 2, or maybe a few more questions right so he or she can go from that 140 to that 150 plus. And if you look at this first page on the guide, you'll notice that there's 2 segments of quantitative reasoning. One is on the first one there, and then if we skip one, you've got another one. So you really have 5 different item types that you can dig a little bit deeper into and think about your materials. What could you do with your materials to dig a little deeper and help your students gain a few more points off of these areas? But Susan, I think there's more than quantitative reasoning. There's also something called algebraic reasoning.
Well, there is, and I think probably another of the big surprises is this first one, where students are having difficulty locating points in a coordinate plane. Now, for those of you who have been around for a while, like Bonnie and I have, then you know that in 2002, one of the big things that was launched was this whole thing where students had to plot points on a coordinate plane and they had to bubble it in. Well, now instead of bubbling, they're clicking. So that truly shouldn't be a big problem for students, but it is because they're not remembering, okay, I have four coordinates, I have four quadrants, which ones are negatives and which ones are positive, and how am I supposed to set up these different points? And so we need to go back and do a little work. We did a lot of work with that on the 2002 test, and I think all we did was we kind of pulled back a little from it, and so if we come back in and work with it, we can. Now, the next one is a little bit different because we may not have done as much work with determining slope as we did on just helping students find those coordinates. But we're going to have to help students in this area because it is about a word problem, and can I determine what the slope of a line is from a graph, an equation, or a table itself. And we're going to talk more about that as we go on through. But let's look at the first one. This is another example from the free practice test that speaks to the issue of plotting coordinates. Now, it doesn't just say that I want you to plot this and this, but rather the student has to go through and read the problem and determine what this is asking for. And it says the scientist plots the data for tree 2 on a coordinate grid. And she begins by plotting data for year 3 and year 11. What are the locations of the 2 points? So my student is going to need to read the table, understand that they've got to look at this tree 2, then further understand looking at different years that are there. And we know that for many of our students, they are not spending as much time as they should when they're working with tables and finding information to make sure they understand what each one is telling them. So that's an important point as they're moving through so that they can, again, work with this. And this is an example of a problem, actually I should say an item, that has several different questions that go with it. So understanding the core information that's provided here is really important to them if they're going to answer those subsequent questions correctly. Now, for some of you, you may have, as you work through some of the items on the free practice test, you may have actually created this particular graph with 2 variable linear equations. And you can see that it's linear because it's going at the same rate, and we have certain data points that we know. And now we're going to look for another one. And this actually comes back to Hartley and his food truck. And Hartley's food truck business is actually selling food on the street. And on day 2, we know the business earned a certain amount of money. Then on day 5, it earned a certain amount of money. And Hartley assumes it's going to continue to increase at the same rate. So now we determine day 10. And thus we have our graph that is here, which shows day 2, day 5. We know that it's on a steady rate. That means it is slope. And that at the end of 10 days, on the 10th day, that Hartley is earning $792. But, Bonnie, does it always have to be this complex?
You know, when we first saw this problem, we used it with teachers across the U.S. and had them solve the problem and then talk about how they solved it. And there were so many ways to solve this problem. You know, some of our teachers used what they called the proportion within the proportion. Some of them used guess, check, and revise, and some said, it's just a basic computation problem. All I have to do is substitute numbers in, and off I go. Now, all of our folks really were using a slope type of situation. However, it does lead us to talk about the fact that when we're teaching math in the classroom, it's so important for us to make sure that students understand there are many different ways to solve a problem. In fact, some of those ways may be much easier for them to use than what the answer rationale comes across from GED testing service. Many ways to solve a problem and get the correct answer. So there again, although it is a sample linear equation problem, it is a slope problem, many of your students may see it a little bit differently. But as we look at resources, there are so many resources that you can use that will help your students with the coordinate plane. We worked with one teacher who would go online and he'd find all these very interactive kinds of websites, and he would have a wireless mouse, and the students would play games where they'd use the wireless mouse to plot the different coordinates. But one of the sites out there that Susan and I have enjoyed using forever is the National Library of Virtual Manipulatives. We all know that students learn best when first they learn mathematical concepts at a very concrete level. And so that means manipulatives. Sometimes we don't have all the manipulatives in our classroom, but with the World Wide Web out there, and with sites such as the National Library of Virtual Manipulatives, we can access everything from algebra tiles to geoboards to different types of point plotters, line plotters, and graphers. The wonderful thing about this particular site is it is free. Utah State University continues to add things, and again, it is an excellent website for you to use in the classroom. One of the things that Susan and I like about this particular very interactive website full of manipulatives is for those of you who are in corrections, we know that you can't always access or use the internet with your students. However, if you do have access to computers, Utah State University has this on a CD, and it's a very minimal cost. So that's what we always look for is as we're teaching the concrete of mathematical reasoning, what's out there for us to use that is free or extremely inexpensive? Because there again, a little bit of time with something like this will then lead students to the next step where they read closely, figure out, and then, quote, plot correctly.
And one thing I will add to what Bonnie just said, because some of you may have been furiously trying to jot down some of those URLs, is that as we go back through and we go through the workbook, we're going to reference you to that site so that you can go in and find it easily. The other thing I will say that if you have questions as we're going through, please feel free to put that into the chat box. If you will send to everyone, then that way Bonnie and I can respond, because there may be a question that you're thinking about at a given slide, and we can help in answering that. So I'll just bring up those two things. But let's talk, Bonnie, here's where we start running into real problems with our students. Whenever they see a letter, then, oh my gosh, it has to be something that's algebra. And how am I going to work with that? How am I going to solve it? And sure enough, here we are. And the first three things that we see here are one variable linear equations and solving linear inequalities and, oh, the big one, which is what most of our students think algebra is all about, and that's quadratic equations. Those are the types of things that our students, they can work through this. However, it really is important that we do something beyond having students just work with the abstract, but rather that they have a chance to do other types of things. But those first two are real basic. All we're doing is taking one variable and say, okay, we're going to solve for that variable and find what that is. Most of our students will say to us in algebra, I'm not ever going to need this. There's no way that I'm ever going to be using algebra in real life. The thing is that you got to tack on that word reasoning, because we use algebraic reasoning in real life. We just don't always think that that's what we're doing. We don't consciously say, oh, I'm going to do this by using my algebraic reasoning skills. But if you think about your morning, and you think about, okay, I'm going to have to get my child to daycare, and I've got to get the other child over to the elementary school, and I have to be at work, and, so taking all of those things into consideration, I've got to come up with what time I can get up in the morning. What's the latest point I can get up and still get the whole household moving and doing what they need? That's algebraic reasoning. We don't think of it that way, but we're solving a problem. And, sometimes we have multiple variables within those with which we're working. So we need to think in terms of how to make this more real for students. Now, sometimes all they're going to be asked to do on the test is actually go in and they're given an expression and they're asked to solve it by substitution. But if you take a look at this sample problem that we have, there are a couple of things where students can run into a problem. Maybe I have difficulty with negative numbers. If that's the case, then I may need to go back and work with my students on that. And why is it that certain things work? But those are some where there's more, it's a little easier as they work through. However, think about that in real life. Here we have Deidre who's planning on joining a gym, and it's $48 a month, or she has to pay $8 a visit. So now the variable here, what we're trying to find out, is how many visits can she make in a month without spending the amount of the membership fee? She's got to decide which is more effective for her, to pay the monthly fee or just the $8 per visit. And we could see that in lots of different ways. Students have to make decisions on, they're going to buy a new smartphone, and then this program has a certain service, but they got to pay this for it. Or this one doesn't, but it has a higher per minute charge. All of those things are about trying to make some decisions and using inequalities, but also algebraic reasoning in order to work through. Now,
Susan, I'm going to go back to that last one because I think that I have a real-world example for that.
Okay.
My husband has been golfing for some time since he retired, and he doesn't always make it out there because he does a lot of other things. So I have a feeling that we would have to look at his golf membership per month and determine how many times he would have to golf at a certain amount of money per time to determine what's the better buy. Should we keep that monthly membership, or would he be better off paying as he goes?
That is a real-world problem. Definitely.
And I think that's what we haven't always looked closely enough at, is connecting algebra to real world, because we really do use it all the time. And I hope, since I see so much of algebraic reasoning happening from a very early level in our schools, that it will indeed transfer to our adult ed students. But I really don't think our adult ed students always see the fact that order of operations, positive, negative numbers, those types of things work the same way. Even fractions and decimals, we have those in number operations, number sense, numeracy, but we also have those same things in algebraic reasoning. They don't change.
You're absolutely right. And, that's the thing for our students, is to finally be able to make those connections as we go through. I want to take just a minute because there's another area here. We're talking about solving problems, but the other end of this in algebraic reasoning is, can I create? Can I create a linear expression as part of a, notice of what it says, word-to-symbol translation? And I take the words, and from those words, come up with the symbols, put things in the proper order so that I can create that linear expression. And this one is very basic, but it can create many problems for our students as they're going through, where you have an algebra test and you got the highest grade with 42 points higher than the lowest grade, and the sum of the two grades was 138, so you got to find the lowest grade. Well, I have to go through and translate that into the symbols, and what I'm trying to find is that L, lowest grade. This is something that our students struggle with in trying to make that assignment, and to them it is hard to even work through the process. Let me show you just two more here, and then we're going to go over and look at a word-to-symbol translation chart that I think will be helpful to you. But this is what one looks like as they look at the free practice test. There are S steps from the pedestal to the head of the Statue of Liberty. The number of steps in the Washington Monument is 27 less than 6 times the number of steps in the Statue of Liberty. Which expression represents the number of steps in the Washington Monument in terms of S? Well, Bonnie, I don't know about you, but some of my students would actually be going through here going, what? I mean, they get lost in the words. Or
mine would go from left to right.
Well, that's
so I'd
true
have
too.
students, who would go 27 minus 6 times, and all of a sudden they would have the incorrect answer because they couldn't translate what it was really saying.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they would be sitting there going, okay, well, this makes sense to me, and just put those things in there. So the same thing, Bonnie, doesn't that occur here? I mean, you've got grandchildren. Haven't you ever dealt with something like this?
This is the type of thing that when you look at real world, many of us have had to deal with how many different types of Girl Scout cookies would our children or grandchildren need to sell, how many different types of popcorn, or we go on field trips, or as a teacher, we have had to sponsor field trips. And we have to decide if there was a certain amount of money that was spent, how much of that was for children's tickets, adults' tickets. So here again, we've got 1 or 2 variable linear equations to represent a real-world situation where students have to reason through using an X for the cost of a child, the Y for the cost of the adult, and for lack of a better term, comparing and contrasting until they are able to reason through the process. Now, we have some students who just seem to have that automaticity of being able to just set up. They see the equations in their mind, and they can set it up. But quite honestly, not too many of us have that skill, that innate skill. And so there again, we need to be able to walk them through in a concrete level. And when you really look at it, how does it look? What kinds of real-world problems would we have? Or how does it look from the item sampler? Well, this goes back to the tree trunk information again. So as Susan said before, oftentimes we are seeing multiple different types of mathematical questions off of one resource. And so we've got the scientist again, but here, instead of having a, quote, answer, students need to use that lovely thing called a drag drop. So this really is multiple steps where they have to be able to model the context with that equation. This is a much higher level thinking skill, but one that our students really are capable of doing. All it takes is a little bit of reasoning and lots of problem-solving kinds of practice in our classrooms, which you'll hear more about at the next webinar. But here's another one, and it's creating one variable linear inequalities. Looks very similar to the one we talked about with the golf, etc., but we can even take it into a geometric problem. Perimeter of a square must be less than 160 feet. What's the maximum length of a side in feet? Missing data. Here again, I could think of that in real-world situations if I were building a house in construction, and I had a certain plot of land, and I had to decide what is, the greatest amount or the least that I can use for perimeter or for, area, etc. Real-world situations attached to algebraic reasoning skills. And as we look at the sample problems, we have a question, actually a couple of them, that we've been pulling questions out of the item sampler. And for those of you who are wondering, where in the world did we get these questions? We'll address that as we go through resources, because GED Testing Service has provided us with a wealth of materials that we can use to determine, okay, what do we need to be teaching and what kinds of materials are going to be best for supporting that. So hold on and we will click into those in just a moment, but great question.
And Bonnie, I'm going to go ahead now and move back over to the workbook we were talking about.
Okay.
And, let's take a look at, because here, again, just as Bonnie had pointed out before, this is all the page. It has all the different problem areas in it, so you have all of those, and you can see that algebraic reasoning that's included there. But this is the one that we wanted to talk about just a little bit. And Bonnie, can you talk about that translation chart and how important that can be?
I'm sure like your students, my students always had difficulty with word problems, and one of the difficulties they had was translating words into an expression or an equation. In fact, what they generally did was what we referred to before. They would read the problem, and they would simply go from left to right. The first number would be first in their equation or expression, and then on they would go. And of course, if they didn't know how to set it up, they would use that time-old strategy of asking the teacher. So a long time ago, we started looking at how could we help our students, and I came up with a translation chart, and I know that different people will add things, delete things, but with my students, I took them and modeled this kind of process with them, which as they read the question, the word problem, they would take a look at some of the English words and determine what mathematical symbol that was. So if you look down at the bottom, if the problem was Jennifer has 10 fewer DVDs than Brad, my students would have said, okay, I've got something for Jennifer. I have has and Brad, and he has 10 fewer. And they would have the wrong equation. But if they use the translation chart, that word has, when you look at it, became the equal sign. So all of a sudden they were thinking to themselves, okay, Jennifer has equal sign, and then Brad with 10 less. And they got it. Something as simple as that will assist students in better reading and translating words to algebraic expressions, or of course, numbers. The other thing that we've included for you, and we'll talk a little more in a bit, but we know that there are something called evidence-based practices for the math classroom. And when you look at this chart, it gives you just a brief overview. We know that we need to design very, very good curriculum for our students. And how do we decide what curriculum design looks like for this new GED test? We'll talk more about some resources that GED Testing Service has provided that we think will really assist you in doing that. But the other thing is we need to continue to learn. So professional development is such an integral part of us, again, creating that better, more effective math classroom. Many of our students are millennials, they're younger, they have grown up with technology. And so not only do we need to provide professional development on the use of instructional technology, because it is part of the 2014 GED test, but more importantly, technology is an integral part of the workplace and of life. And so even for those of us who are more mature, we use technology all the time, and it is an evidence-based practice, not just for the math classroom, but for all of our classrooms. You've heard us talk about manipulatives, and to me it is one of the integral parts of any math classroom because our students need to be able to touch, to feel, to see how things work, and it provides us one way to teach in the concrete. And there again, instructional strategies. How do we teach math? We need to go back and teach much, much more of the why instead of the how. Worksheets are not enough. Our students need us to work through problem-solving strategies and show them why something works. So there again, this will give you just a few ideas to get started.
And Bonnie, I think I'll hold on this one for just a minute,
Yes.
and we will come back to the websites themselves, because there is one other thing that I want to mention to you. We talked about this yesterday with students, but we haven't done anything with it today, so I'm going to pop right back over here. Here is an issue that our students are having when it comes to algebra that is what we call an easy fix. And it comes down to this little symbol right here, and let's see if I can get my marker and I can actually draw it there. Okay. It's called an equal sign. And not a big deal. I mean, most students recognize that, hey, that's an equal sign. It's how they're defining that equal sign that's creating a problem for them when they get into algebra. Because what happens is, as they're going through number operations, number sense, all these different things, what they're doing is they're seeing an equal sign as kind of a, ta-da, here's the answer. It comes right after that. It announces an answer. And the reality that we know is that the equal sign is about a relationship. It's not about, oh, here's the answer, but rather it's about having an understanding of equivalence. What we can do, and it can start with us with our very most basic students in ABE, is begin to use that term is equivalent to from the very beginning. I mean, there's no reason why we can't say 3 plus 4 is equivalent to 7 as opposed to equals or totals. It's a different mindset for students so that then when they're faced with something like this, they're already looking at equivalence on both sides of that sign, what that relationship is. It's a simple thing, but it's something that if we begin to use that term, the research is really clear. Our students will not have as many problems transitioning into algebraic reasoning and working with expressions and equations. They won't have the problems that they do now. All it does is means that we have to start taking some words out of our vocabulary and using others. And equivalence is a really, really big thing as we're moving through. So keep note of that and just think about how many times you say equals as opposed to is equivalent to, and how you can change that as you're going through. So let's talk a little bit about the challenge. Bonnie mentioned a few things as she was going through the best practices as far as math instruction goes, but in the classroom there's some things we need to do. First of all, we've got to increase instruction on problem-solving strategies. And we're, as we said earlier, we're going to take a deep dive into that during our next webinar, which is in April. We have to go in and start thinking more about how do we get to geometry and algebraic thinking and increase that, because if you go back in and look again at that list that we had of most missed items, what do you find? That's where they're residing. Our students can do higher order math. There's no doubt about that, but they have to be exposed to it. And so we have to work with students to make sure that we're pushing. Little ones in kindergarten and first grade, they're already working with variables, and they're working with that equivalence, and they're learning all these basics of algebraic reasoning. There's no reason our ABE students, as well as our GED students, can't do the same. We've said it numerous times, probably more than you want to hear, but we have to get down into that why. Why does this work? Not just that it is, but why does it work? Because that's going to mean that a student can then take information and transfer it in to what they're doing. Now, one other thing. We have to have more of incorporating close reading strategies into the math classroom. Bottom line. We have to start doing more close reading, and we will talk about that specifically as we go into the problem-solving session. And then also, Bonnie and I are firm believers that our students can do anything. They can achieve at a level at which we think they can. And so we're going to set the bar higher and work with them to make sure that they understand all of those different elements as they go through. So, having said that, Bonnie, you want to share a couple of tools with people here? And I'm not sure why our PLDs didn't come in again, but.
Definitely. From GED Testing Service, they've provided us with so many different types of instructional tools. One of them that I think is extremely valuable in the development of curriculum are their PLDs, better known as performance level descriptors. And they are such important resources for the classroom because they provide all of us with a roadmap of the various skills that are necessary at each of the 3 performance levels. Level 1 being those skills that students need to have. Those are the skills that students may have mastered but are below that 150. And then level 2, which are those skills they need to have mastery of in order to pass the test. And of course, level 3, which would be those honor level types of skills. But how Susan and I like to use the PLDs is when we're looking at materials. Do those materials cover those level 2 skills well? Or are they below level 1 skills? We often are asked, what are the best materials for my classroom? Well, bottom line is, it depends upon your students. It depends upon your teaching style. But what we would tell you and advise you strongly to do is take a good look at the mathematical reasoning PLDs and then take a look at the materials either you have or that you want to purchase or use in your classroom and compare and contrast them. If those materials strongly cover in a real-world contextualized approach those things that are on level 2, then it would be a good way to, again, incorporate those materials into your classroom. Again, we keep talking about contextual ed, and that's because research really does tell us over and over again that our students learn more and they retain for a longer period of time that information if it's presented in the context to which they are learning it. But there are a whole lot of other tools, and a number of you have asked, where do I find some of this? You go to the GED Testing Service website, click on Educators, and then under the tab for the educator, you're going to find all of these resources, such as the PLDs, the item samplers, which is where we pulled many of the questions that we use today, the tutorials that are there for such things as the calculator. And we love the tutorials that talk about the different item types and how do you drag drop, how do you, hit those hot spots. And all of those are free. The tutorials, the types of scoring tools, etc. And things like the item sampler or the free practice test are also in Spanish, so both English and Spanish. I don't know about you, but what Susan and I have found is that we have had more information on this test. Sometimes we feel like maybe it's overload, but we have everything that we need to know what is on this test, what are some tools that we can use in the classroom. And you'll notice on this page there's even a teacher's guide. Professional development has been developed by GED Testing Service for our usage. And again, all of this is archived there. So if you've not been out,
and Bonnie, let me interrupt you one more thing on that, because professional development is so important. The other thing you'll find under the professional development is also a link to the 2 courses that are currently hosted by KET's Teacher Line. Those are 2 free online courses that you can take dealing with the 2014 test. And for some of you who may be new, you know, this is your first year in, and or you're just getting started with things, or you need to go back and do some refreshing, it's a great resource. And that was a joint venture between KET and the GED Testing Service.
You know, that's a great thing. And one last thing, when you go out to the GED Testing Service website, please, please sign up for their free newsletter, because you want to be the first person to know the latest, greatest. And so their in-session newsletter comes out about twice a month. And in that newsletter, you know, what we have found is, like I said, the latest, greatest, but when there are certain things like, oh gosh, free or reduced cost vouchers for the GED Ready, when things change or get added, those are the types of items that are in that newsletter. So wonderful things. But Susan, talk to us a little bit about what is now called the GED Ready. And for those of us who have been around a long time, we used to call it the official practice test.
And you know, Bonnie, it's one of those things where I still have, well, quite often actually, old habits die hard, call it the practice test or the OPT, which now is the GED Ready. But I want to talk to you from a standpoint of the importance of students coming in who are in the program and saying, you know, I think I'm ready, to really take that, the GED Ready, get their report back, because they get a score report that comes back instantly to them, sharing that with you so that any areas that may be a little weak you can work on. Because it does give a breakdown and even is tied into a lot of the materials that are out there. So, you know, if you use materials from New Readers Press, or you're using materials from Contemporary or any number of places, you can find some correlations there as well. But the other thing to this is that between 95, if a student scores in the green zone, which we call the likely to pass zone of the GED Ready, 95 to 97% of them will pass the GED operational test, or the, quote, real GED test. Now, there are, and we had this conversation on Tuesday with some people, there are some students every now and then who they don't pass the real test, but it's a very rare number of students who do. And many times that comes down to the fact that the practice test itself, the GED Ready, is half length, and that can create a problem for students as they go in. But also just the anxiety that some students have when they go into that real testing situation, that can also create some problems. But when you start talking about 95 to 97%, you know, reliability and predicting their success, that's really something that, I mean, all of us wish that we had that sitting out there. So keep that in mind and how important that test is. Now, there are currently 2 versions of the GED Ready available, and we've had them this past year. They are in English. They are rolling out more versions as we speak. In fact, I think 2 more out, but I don't know the exact content areas. There will be some more coming along as we go through. In Spanish, there are 2 versions of the GED Ready in Spanish. and students can continue to take those. The process that has happened over the years has been that in the initial year of testing, there are two practice tests that are out there, and then they begin to add to those. So they're in that process right now. The bottom line when it comes to GED Ready is that if you take that enhanced score report and then you also look at the information that's included there, that content, it's going to give you some real insights into what your students need, if they're going to be working on some things and need to continue on before they take the test. It gives you a lot of information. There's so many things that are out there that you really do need to take into consideration. Now, GED Testing Service has a wealth of information, but you know what? There are tons of resources, free resources, that all of us can be taking advantage of because we know that there are so many different things that make a difference for students. And I do have one comment that's come in, especially to GED Ready, and it goes back and it says that they should give the correct answers and worked out solutions for the GED Ready. Actually, what we're looking at here is what the enhanced score report does is actually give students the areas, the concepts which they're missing. Because, you know, they're never going to see that same test again. That same question won't ever pop up on an operational test. And so that has always been the case with providing information on the enhanced score report that tells students where their problem areas are, knowledge and conceptually, but not in going through and actually giving them the answers to that problem. And I do understand that many students, they want to see that. They want to know exactly what went on and why they missed this and so on. But the process really here is about focusing on those big concepts and students being able to understand them. But what we're going to do is, Bonnie, I'm going to move back over to the other document because I'd like you, if you would, to talk just a little bit about the websites that we have here and how people might be able to use those.
Okay. I love the World Wide Web. There's just such a great plethora of materials out there. Just a couple things for you to take a look at, though. If you're like many of us, you may need that little bit of refresher in math because it's been a while since you took algebra or geometry, etc. And there's a great site out there called the Annenberg Learner. They have really quality professional development in the areas of geometry, algebra. I think there's about 4 of them in algebra, including one in algebra in real world. What I like about those types of PD is if you want it for credit, there is a cost, but otherwise it's free, and you can just go ahead and pick and choose and take a look at things. But what I found was it gave me a lot of that conceptual knowledge that refreshed what I often say I used to know. So the Annenberg Learner is really a great place to look for PD material. But there's also a lot of sites out there. We have talked about algebra tiles, and we'll show you a couple sites out there on not only how to use algebra tiles, but some of the interactivity, such as the top one you see, Algebra for All, which is from Michigan Virtual University. And that's very much an interactive site that shows you how to use algebra tiles to solve a multitude of problems. There are also, you probably know well, Illuminations, which great lesson plans, and it's out of the National Council of Teachers of Math, NCTM. And, of course, Ann is also a part of that, our adult numeracy network. Now, again, I'm looking at algebraic reasoning, and there are so many different areas that my students need to have a little better skill at solving those kinds of problems. What do I do in the classroom? Well, here's one idea for you. The Math Dude is a PBS video curriculum for the basics of algebra. And what this gentleman does is gives you real-world scenarios. And as I was looking at the overview of the types of things he does in these videos, which again you can watch either on the internet or you can download them, I couldn't find a single area that he covers that's not part of the assessment targets on the GED math test. So, as an instructor, I could introduce a concept by showing my students the math dude, getting them grounded in some real-world situation of why they need to use this. From there, I could go into a classroom where I use problems, real-world problems that I teach that process of how to do it. And of course, the Khan Academy does a great job of a step-by-step process. So maybe I use Khan in conjunction with my teaching in the classroom, and then I give my students a homework example with, again, that Khan Academy to walk them through the step-by-step. Just one way to do it. We've talked a lot about contextual ed. You'll notice that we have a few websites here, such as Math in the News, which gives you some real-world situations. National Library of Virtual Manipulatives, if you want the URL for it, it's right there. And then sometimes we have some great websites from our state. So don't overlook the fact that your state, your adult ed state level have some wonderful materials. We've given you one here from Ohio, and although it's a K through 12 site, Stella's Stunners and the Problem Corner can provide you with great resources for problems to use in problem solving. We don't want you to forget calculator practice because that can make the difference for a comfort level for our students. And what we love about the sites that we've given you, even though the URLs are very lengthy, is that Texas Instruments not only has a guide in font that I can read, but they also have 15 free lesson plans that deal with nothing but the TI-30XS multi-view. Now, if you don't want to cut-paste these, again, if you'll just go into Texas Instruments, you will find not only the guide, but the 15 lesson plans, and they've got Blackline Masters that you can use, and Susan's and my favorite strategy called the Bob Method, back of the book. It gives you the answer key as well. At the bottom here, you have two different sites that use algebra tiles. And one of the things we like about these is, again, they're instructor sites that give you that step-by-step. But if you want a massive website, go to TES. It is very much an international website, and it's got free resources. Yes, you heard us right, free, in all academic areas. There are some great, great math resources out there. And we've also included the GED Testing Service websites. If you're not aware, there's more than just the website. They also have Twitter, Facebook, and a YouTube channel. In fact, many of our students use the Twitter account, and I'll be the first to tell you I don't use Twitter as much as I use Facebook. But both of those things give me some great real-world human interest stories to use in my classroom. And there again, the YouTube channel will give you all the many videos that GED Testing Service has. And if you've not seen it in the chat box, Amber has provided to everyone a quick and easy URL on how to get that newsletter. So if you're not signed up for the newsletter, before you leave the web today, click in that short URL and sign up for it. So Susan, let's see what questions we have, because we're going to end our part of this before the questions and answer is the fact that we really do believe in the quote that the essence of math is not to make simple things complicated, but to make complicated things simple. So having said that, Amber, we're going to open up for questions, and so we're going to take a quick look, making sure that we do not miss any raised hands. So if you've got a question or a comment, if you will, please click your name and then click the raised hand, and Amber will unmute you so you can ask the question in person rather than keyboarding it into the chat box.
And surely we don't have a bunch of shy folks out there.
No question.
I have never known adult educators to be shy, okay? Or if you don't want to speak and you have that burning question, although the burning question may come 5 minutes after you hang up, go ahead and feel free to also put it in the chat box.
In the meantime, what I will do is, while you're working up your nerve to ask your questions, I will say that we want you to tune in on Wednesday, April the 28th at 3 o'clock. That's Eastern Standard Time. That is when we will be doing the mathematical problem solving webinar, and we have a lot of great information that we're going to be sharing on problem solving and how we can go through and work from that angle, because that is such an important part of what we're doing. And we also have the, we're going to do, if you've got any other questions once we hang up today, you can always contact the GED Testing Service at communications@gedtestingservice.com. And I believe we have from Judy Stetson, close reading strategies, top tips. We're going to be doing quite a bit with close reading as we kind of move on into the future itself. But one of the things I'll tell you that with close reading it's so important is that close reading is about reading and rereading. In fact, they call it purposeful rereading, which many of our students don't necessarily do. What we're going to share in the problem-solving webinar is that we're going to talk about some graphic organizers that you can use in order to help students use close reading specifically in math, and how they look for details and how they're, finding what that question is really asking. There are a number of different things that are there, but the first thing I would say to anybody with close reading is that is about having students read and reread, but also begin that process that many of us used as we were in college and we were in high school even, where they begin to learn how to annotate text. And that's about being able to, not just highlight or underline everything, but ask themselves questions about what this problem is saying or what this text is telling them. But we'll have a lot more to share with you as we keep moving on in.
All right, so we have a question from Laura Martinez. Laura, can you go ahead and unmute your line? Your phone isn't connected to your name. How to unmute is just press #6.
Hello?
Yep.
Hi, Laura.
Fantastic. Yes.
I got it?
Yes.
Yes, you do.
This is actually a general question. We focus, not a lot, but we do focus on some Spanish GED. And our question is, the math part, I know that in the English GED, everything has been changed and it has been revised. Now, when it comes to the math and the testing in Spanish, has it also been revised?
Yes.
Yes.
It is indeed the same test in Spanish as it is in English.
Okay, and but there isn't a new book out for Spanish GED, is there?
If you go, yes, there are materials that are now developed for the Spanish GED, translations of a lot of materials. On GED Testing Service, there are a number of vendors who are part of the marketplace. If you look there, you should find a vendor or two that has indeed put all of their materials into Spanish as well. On the GED Testing Service site, the item sampler, the free practice test, etc., are also all in Spanish. So, but if you have questions about specific things as you look at the marketplace, please communicate with what Susan has up here, communications@gedtestingservice.com, and they can give you specific ones who have put it in Spanish.
Okay, we'll go ahead and look into that because we are having a problem with that because we didn't know there was new material for that. That's why.
Yes, yes, and it really, just for your knowledge, it is the same test that's been translated into Spanish. What we're hearing, at least from some of the folks we deal with who really are using a lot of Spanish GED, is even the form of the Spanish they like much better with this version of the test. But there again, with some of the math, some of those concepts should not be a problem for our students. However, translating word problems, again, can always be a difficult thing, whether it is in the Spanish language or the English language.
Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and look into that then. Thank you so much.
Okay, great.
How do I hang up from here?
You can pound 6 if you'd like, and that will remute you.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, the next question we have is from Sarah Smith. I'm unmuting your line right now. All right, Sarah, go ahead.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Sarah.
Okay, great. Good evening. I'd like to know if Pearson VUE is considering providing a formula page and resource during the testing. I think it'd be really great with time.
I'm sorry, but you were totally breaking up to me. Can you repeat that one more time, please?
I also put it in chat text. So
Okay, that will be fine. I'm really sorry, but for some reason you were popping in and out, so I could only get just a couple of your words.
Let me try again about asking if Pearson VUE we're considering providing the formula page as a hands-on resource during the testing instead of online, on screen.
That would go, because it is GED testing service, but I would suggest that you request that, communications@gedtestingservice.com. At this point, neither Susan or I know of any focus on that. Just realize that students have access to it whenever they need it on the test, and they can make that formula page smaller, they can move it, etc. But as far as a paper pencil version of it, Amber, do you know of any?
Yeah, so I can speak to that just a little bit. A paper pencil version most likely will not be provided for the actual test, but we do have versions online that you can print that can be used before the test taker actually takes the exam, but definitely not during the test at this moment.
Well, likely making named paper pencils just like the writing board, something that's just usable,
You're
like
talking
the writing board
about
they have.
The erasable note board? Yeah, so those are actually provided. Can you guys hear me?
I think the question that's coming back, though, is that, Sarah, if I'm understanding you correctly, really what you're getting from some students is they would like to have a piece of paper sitting next to them or laminated paper, whatever, that actually shows all those formulas and that they don't have to click on anything to get there. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and at this point there is no plan to do that. However, there is something I think that really could be helpful to students, and we don't always take as much advantage of it as we should, and that is the tutorial for this test. Because what happens with students who encounter the test, and the math test especially, where they've got several different things they can access, they just need some time to play with it up front, and they actually can do that, and they can do that tutorial over and over and over again. It's something you can download to a computer there at your site and have students work with it. They can access it themselves, at home. And it's really about some practice. But, there are some things that then become issues related to security test issues. And the more paper that you have available, the more possibilities there are that are out there that certain things are just not there anymore. So my recommendation to you would truly be, one, it's certainly an issue that you can send in to communications at GED Testing Service and explain your concerns regarding it, but also that please, everybody, take advantage as much as you can of that math tutorial, because that's one of the things we found that a lot of students don't do, and then they get into the test and they're like, oh, what am I supposed to do with this? And even though they have instructions, it throws them off a little bit. So the more we can do with that, hopefully the more help it will be. So thank you, Sarah, for your question and your concern. We really do appreciate that. Amber, do you see anybody else?
Yes, we have another question. A hand raised is from Alan. Yes. Alan, if you want to go ahead and speak up.
I have two questions. One is, my students are concerned because when they take the GED Ready, they don't get to know what answers they get right or wrong. And at $6 test, they feel that's rather expensive not to get any feedback.
Well, Alan, actually, I think you and I have had a little bit of a conversation here privately on this one, but what I will tell you is that here is an issue that we can go back to from a time long ago when we used to have a paper pencil version, and after a student took a practice test, we'd sit down and go through each of the questions and what they got wrong and what they didn't. And so then the student knew exactly what they had missed on that question, but they would never see that question again. So what the GED Testing Service has done in putting together the enhanced score report is to show them specifically where they had difficulty, but at the same time not saying, problem 3, you had a math error, you multiplied incorrectly. What they do want to see, I know the student, and I saw from your earlier one where your student still cheated.
And throw it away. Because if you get one question wrong, first of all, they have no idea how many questions they got wrong. Second of all, you give them these broad areas, some of them, they're every area. They want to see what they got wrong. They could get a question wrong because they did the multiplication wrong. Everything else is right. They have no clue. On the other hand, they could have a question where everything is wrong and they still don't know anything about the question. Giving a person an area, the questions, as you probably know, cover 2, 3, 4 different areas. It's not fair to the students. I don't know who to tell it to. I'm telling it to you so that maybe you would tell it to them, because I don't think it's fair.
Then what I would recommend at this point, Alan, is you should see on the GED Testing Service, on the slide that's there now, where it says communications at GEDtestingservice.com, and those are reviewed constantly. So if you could send a note to them, articulate exactly where your students are feeling, then I'm sure what they'll do from there is have someone who will get back with you and talk with you about that specifically.
The other question, are students going to be allowed to bring in paper and pencil?
Excuse me?
Are students given paper and pencil?
No, they are not given paper and pencil. What they are given within the testing itself is they are given writing boards, which are basically, think of them as large laminated sheets. They have multiples of those, and they're given markers so that they can do all of the notes, the math, anything that they need to. It's all provided in class. The reason why there is no, quote, paper and pencil is that this test has gone green, so we don't have the issue of lots of paper out there, but also it is a security issue. Having been someone who administered the GED test, one of the things that we always knew was a very big concern for people was someone copying questions down and walking out of the room with them. And so now they have the laminated sheets. If they need more, the proctor will give them more. They can mark on those. They can do all of their computations. All of those things are available.
How big they are?
Yes, they're legal size.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Do we have any other questions?
Yes, we do. Just give me just a second. The next one is Donna Skina, I believe. Donna, I'm not able to see your call-in number. Can you go ahead and press #6 so you can be unmuted?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
very well.
Excellent. I have a question. The 2002 series, a lot of the testing centers administrators provided I want to say it was the Casio FX360 calculator. Do we have any plans to have the testing sites have the TI-30XSs on hand so they don't have to use the virtual calculator or bring their own?
Susan, I'm trying to remember how many months ago the handheld calculator is used.
Yeah, the calculator is used, but I will say, and this one will have to follow up for you, I believe that the student is expected to bring it in unless there may be specific testing centers that provide it. But I know that as long as it's the TI-30XS, that they're allowed to use the handheld. And so let me do a follow-up on that, and we may be able to find that on the FAQs at this point.
Well, I would just love to see a move to where the testing sites have these on hand so students don't have to use the virtual. I know they can bring their handheld in if they have the TI-30XS, but I'd love to see a move.
They can bring it in, but I think your concern is that you'd like to see a testing center provide it at no cost to the student.
As they did prior.
Right, and that really comes back to some decisions at the jurisdictional level, at the testing center level.
Sure. I just wanted to see something, maybe in action for that. I appreciate it.
Okay, sure, no problem.
All right, thank you. The next question we have is from Cynthia Withers. And Cynthia, I'm unmuting you now. Cynthia, I'll go ahead and unmute you. I will unmute you. Okay, you can speak up now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, very well, Cynthia.
Oh, she just muted.
And we just lost her.
Cynthia, if you could, don't worry about muting or unmuting yourself. Amber's going to do that for you. And so hold on just 1 second, and Amber will unmute you again. Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Okay, yes. The PowerPoint from today, is that available for us to print out?
Hi, Cynthia. Yes, we sent it in a confirmation email this morning, a follow-up email to everyone this morning, and then we also plan to send a follow-up email tomorrow morning or afternoon where you can access the current presentation and the math worksheet that we referenced today as well.
Thank you very much.
Sure, no problem.
I think we have time for about one more question, Susan, because the time draws near to close out.
Yes, it does. I believe we have everyone that has their hand up. We've got them.
Hello? Hello?
Hi.
Hi.
Hello? Hey, I just wanted to make a comment about the comment about the writing boards doing the math.
Mm-hmm.
We should likely be using wipe-off boards and small dry erase markers in our classrooms.
Actually,
we know that some people do.
Yeah, some people do that, and their students, get used to using those. Others don't, and quite honestly, students do quite well either way. So if you have access to them, then certainly give it a shot in the classroom so students just get used to it. And otherwise, know that the biggest issue is that there's been no process so that they can go in and work with it. But good suggestion for you. Thank you.
I want to jump in here. For using the sample noteboards in your classroom, we do provide those through Brand Central. It's our online fulfillment site, and you can order those. And obviously, it can't be used on the test, but it is a great way for the students to practice in the classroom. I can put that link in the session. Give me just a second.
Right. I put on the list of resources. The testing center, I work in a juvenile facility, and we do provide the handheld calculators in our center.
Okay, great. Good to know.
Yeah, that's good.
As we close out today, we would like to thank everyone. Great comments, great questions. Please know that we are going to continue with some of these webinars. This is the first in this series. But Susan and I found this quote some time ago, and we both totally believe this, that high achievement always occurs in the framework of high expectations. If we expect the best from our students, they're going to work hard to do that. So on behalf of GED Testing Service, we'd like to thank Amber for pitch hitting on all of the things and all the support that she's provided today, and to each of you for being with us. We hope to see you again in April. So have a great rest of the afternoon. And Susan, anything else for the good of the order?
No, we'll see you next time, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.